For most of human history, if you could build a wall high enough, you were safe. That was the deal. That was the agreement between stone and survival. You put enough rock between yourself and the world outside, and the world outside could not reach you. Cities existed because of this logic. Civilizations were built on it. The wall was not just architecture, it was the founding promise of every settlement that ever asked its people to stay in one place and trust that staying was safer than running. And for a very long time, it was. Then someone decided the wall was a problem to be solved, and the history of everything that followed, the ram, the ladder, the catapult, the trebuchet, the explosive shell, is not really the history of weapons. It is the history of one question asked over and over again across 4,000 years. How do you break something that was built specifically to be unbreakable? Let's start with the door, because before any army ever built a machine or launched a stone or climbed a wall in the dark, they stood at the gate and tried the simplest possible thing first. They tried to push their way in. A city gate in the ancient world was a marvel of defensive engineering. Thick timber, reinforced with iron, set into a stone frame, braced from behind with horizontal beams dropped into brackets. It was designed to absorb exactly the kind of force a human body could generate. And it succeeded. A man cannot break a gate. 10 men cannot break a gate. But a tree can. The battering ram was not an invention. It was an observation. Someone looked at the gate, looked at the forest, and understood that the mass of a large timber moving at speed carried more force than anything a human body alone could generate. The earliest rams were simply large logs carried by many men and swung repeatedly into the same point on the gate until the point gave way. It worked. And so the gate builders responded. They thickened the timber. They added more iron. They built towers on each side of the gate so archers could rain arrows down on anyone carrying a ram toward it. They poured boiling water. They dropped stones. And the ram builders responded to that. They built a roof over the ram, a mobile wooden roof on wheels, covered in wet animal hides to resist fire, housing the ram and the men swinging it in a protected shell. The defenders could no longer reach the men inside. The ram could now work uninterrupted. The door became a race. How fast could the ram break it? How long could the defenders hold? Every siege in the ancient world was, at its center, this single question playing out in real time. But the gate was never the only way in, because a wall has a top. Every wall ever built has a top edge, and that edge, that thin horizontal line of stone or brick or wood running along the highest point of the fortification, is a destination. If you can reach it, you are inside. And the men who understood this understood something the architects of the wall had been hoping everyone would forget. The wall is only as strong as the ground directly at its base. Night was the tool. The darkness before dawn. The hours when the sentries were coldest and most tired. When the watch rotation produced its inevitable moments of inattention. Was when the ladders went up. Long wooden scaling ladders carried forward under cover of darkness, placed against the wall in silence, climbed by men in groups who needed to reach the top before anyone above noticed and raised the alarm. It was not glorious. It was not the version that appears in paintings. It was terrifying and quiet and desperately fast. The man at the top of the ladder was the most exposed human being in the world in that moment. One defender with a spear waiting above what was enough to end the entire effort at that point. So the climbers went fast, and they went in numbers, and they trusted that at least some of them would reach the top before the top was defended. And sometimes they did. The defenders answered the ladder with the pole, a long wooden pole used to push the ladder away from the wall mid-climb, sending it and its occupants backward into the darkness below. Then with grappling hooks to catch the ladder tops and drag them sideways. Then with stones dropped directly onto the approach, making the ground at the base of the wall impossible to cross on foot. Every answer produced a new question, and then someone changed the question entirely. If the wall cannot be broken at its gate, and cannot be climbed at its face, there is one remaining option: break it at its body. The catapult arrived in the ancient Greek world around the 4th century before the Common Era and represented something genuinely new in the logic of warfare. Not a tool for getting over the wall or through the gate, a machine for destroying the wall itself, for making the wall the target rather than the obstacle. The earliest versions were tension-powered, enormous bows mounted on frames, drawing back massive bolts or stones with the stored energy of twisted rope or bent wood. They were not enormously accurate, but accuracy was not always the point. The point was terror. The sound of a stone the size of a man's torso hitting the inside of a defended city at speed, crashing through a roof, destroying a building, killing anyone unlucky enough to be near the impact, was a sound no city had been built to absorb. The wall kept the army out. The wall could not keep the stones out. And then came the trebuchet. If the catapult was the question, the trebuchet was the answer to every limitation the catapult had. A counterweight machine. A long throwing arm with an enormous weight on the short end and a sling on the long end that used gravity instead of tension to generate its force. The trebuchet could throw heavier stones farther and with more consistency than any tension machine ever built. A large trebuchet could hurl a stone weighing 200 kilograms over 200 meters with enough precision to strike the same section of wall repeatedly. The same section of wall. Repeatedly. That was the strategy. Not to destroy the wall in one blow, but to hit the same point until the mortar between the stones gave way, until the foundation cracked, until the section that had stood for 100 years collapsed in an afternoon. And they would throw other things too. Diseased animals, barrels of burning pitch, the bodies of the dead, anything that could demoralize, infect, or set fire to what was inside the walls. The trebuchet was not just a demolition machine, it was a delivery system for everything the defenders feared most. But here is what no siege engine, no ram, no ladder, no stone ever fully solved: time. A city with enough food and enough water and enough will could outlast any machine ever built. The walls of Constantinople held for over 1,000 years against armies that had every weapon their era could produce. The wall did not fall to a better ram or a bigger trebuchet. It fell to gunpowder, to a cannon, to a technology so different from everything that came before it that the 4,000-year conversation between wall and machine came to its end, not with a better answer to the same question, but with an entirely different question replacing it. The age of walls was over. But for 4,000 years before that moment, the greatest minds of every civilization that ever fought a siege had stood outside a wall and asked the same thing. How do you break something built to be unbreakable? And the answer, every time, was the same. You find the one thing the builder forgot to protect, and you do not stop until you find it.